Now when we talk about this abstract concept of remembering Allah, this is where I want to begin. What does it mean to remember Allah or to engage in remembrance? One of the things I alluded to in my previous talk was remembrance is not just limited to remembrance of Allah. It's also remembering the right thing to do, remembering our role models, remembering their struggles, taking inspiration from them, remembering the gifts of Allah. It's not, remembering what the gifts of people that have done to us, like remembering the favors of your mom when you're about to get angry at her. Just remembering the right thing at the right time. This is also a kind of dhikr. So the Quran is not just dhikr of Allah, it's also dhikr through that of other things that you're going to need. Reminders that you and I need constantly of different kinds of things. Now, having said that, usually when you and I think of dhikr, we think of somebody sitting and doing the adhkar, they're reciting either tasbih or they're reciting Quran and they're praying. They're engaged in some kind of worship. And this is the context in which you and I think about dhikr. And we're going to broaden our horizon in this session. We're going to think about dhikr in much more broader terms as inspired by these ayat of the Quran. This is now going to start with the story of Sulaiman alayhi salam, which, by the way, interestingly enough, comes right after the following ayah. Kitabun anzalnahu ilayka mubarakun liyadabbaru ayatihi. A book that we have sent down to you that is full of continual and increasing blessings. It keeps on giving you more and more and more and more. The idea of the kitab being mubarak is that when we recite the Quran and ponder over the Quran, it is actually going to give us more benefits and it will open up more doors of its wisdom than it did the last time you read it. Hence, لِيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِهِ, so they continually reflect and ponder deeply into its ayat. In other words, the process of reflecting on the Quran will never come to an end until the Day of Judgment. Nobody will come along and say, I have extracted everything there was to be extracted from the Quran. That is not going to happen. Because it is by definition Mubarak. It continues to give more and more and more than what is expected. So there is no such thing as underestimating the Quran. There's never going to be a point in my life where I'll say, that surah, I already studied it. I'm already done with that ayah. I already finished this, this juz or this section or this story in the Quran. I already know everything there is to know about it. Never going to happen. There are always going to be things that you and I are going to discover about this book. And this is the humility you and I have to have towards the Quran. This is يَعْلُو وَلَا يُعْلَى عَلَيْهِ. It supersedes, it's not superseded upon. It imposes, it's not imposed upon. And I have to bring, you have to bring that attitude to the Quran. It's not like any other book. You can master other books. You can master other books. You can't master the Quran. The Quran masters you. You don't master the Quran. You humble yourself and I humble myself before Allah's word. So now with this introduction, which is about the Quran itself, he says, لِيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِهِ, so they reflect, ponder deeply into his ayat, وَلِيَتَذَكَّرَ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ, and people of sound minds, people who deeply like to think, that they make an effort to really remember. This is the introductory ayah before we get into the story of Sulaiman alayhi salam, who's the son of who? You remember from the last time? Son of Dawood, which is the previous passage. So between that passage and this passage is this ayah about the Quran, reflect deeply. As if Allah is saying, before you engage the story of Sulaiman, know that to understand it, you're going to have to think very deeply. And you're going to have to do a lot of review and reiteration and think through and think through and think through before you arrive at what Allah wants you to arrive at. It's not just going to come without effort. وَلِيَتَذَكَّرَ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ لِيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِهِ. These are not easy things. Reflection doesn't just happen when you're just sitting there and just reciting casually. It requires you to leave other thoughts behind and just engage yourself in the book of Allah. And that's before I get into these ayat. And by the way, I'm going to so stick to my time. Watch. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to be so good with my time. But before I get into these ayat, I do want to share with you one of the most valuable things I learned from a writer, Amin Ahsan Islahi, rahimahullah. He wrote an Urdu book called Mabadi Tadabbur al-Quran, and he wrote something in there that struck me. I read this maybe 12 years ago, and it's been in my head since. He gave this analogy about the attitude we're supposed to have towards the Quran when we study it. And the analogy he gave is, if I were to tell you that I have buried $5 in the backyard, 10 feet deep, here's a shovel. The effort it takes to dig 10 feet is not worth what? $5. But if I were to tell you I've buried $5 million, 10 feet deep, you know what, let's make it interesting, 20 feet deep. Then the effort is totally worth it. You're going to be exhausted, You're going to have die, but you know what? Even when you're three feet into it and you feel like you're not making any progress, you remind yourself what this is worth. And you get back in it. And your family is saying, take a break. No, I'll take a break when I'll take a break. When your body can't take anymore and you collapse, and as soon as you wake up, you don't think about food, you think about digging again. Because you know what the effort is worth. In other words, human beings apply effort. By nature, we exhaust ourselves when we know something is worth it. And so he made the argument that if somebody doesn't have time to reflect on the Quran, maybe they just they haven't internalized what it's worth. They just haven't internalized what it's worth. Because if they did, they'd drop other things and they'd make time to reflect. It wouldn't be a casual endeavor for them. It would be something totally worth it. And actually the reflection on the Quran, أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا, the cost of it, it's not just there's a treasure that lies underneath, which it does. It certainly does. But as a matter of fact, people who don't reflect on the Quran, Allah complains they have their own locks placed on them. It's a very serious matter, tadabbur in the Quran. It's not a casual thing. It's not something for the scholars to do or for some group of people to do that, the rest of us are off the hook. They can do the reflections for us. As a matter of fact, tadabbur, the idea of pondering over the Quran, learning its meanings, learning the basic meanings, studying a tafsir or something like that, but then your own engagement with the book, your heart and soul engrossed in the word of Allah. That is something Allah wanted for every single human being. This is one of the things that makes our religion beautiful, is that we actually don't have intermediaries between us and Allah. Allah speaks directly to every single believer, right? And He didn't impose on us this artificial hierarchy that, unless you do this, and this, you cannot engage with the book of Allah. No, He opened this book to all of humanity. As a matter of fact, He invited all of humanity to reflect on it. And unfortunately, we've got a culture in which we confuse learning from reflection, right? There's a bare minimum every Muslim should try and learn. Right? And there's some things, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. If you're in your own reflections, if you don't learn, you can't reflect. So you're on a constant journey to learn. But this unfortunate kind of attitude that until you become a shaykh, you shouldn't even think about the Quran. This is a disservice to the book of Allah. This is not what the intent ever was. There were plenty of people in our history, even from the Sahaba generation, who were not very knowledgeable in the Quran. They knew very little Quran, but whatever little they knew, they pondered over. They reflected over. They constantly mulled over. This is something that deserves our time. And this is not just an intellectual exercise. The Quran makes it very clear. Hearts get locked. It's a spiritual exercise.
الأرض ميدان